My name is Valeria Solis, and this is my athlete interview project. For this presentation, I will be focusing on NCAA versus non-NCAA sports, gender discrimination, athletics versus education, and toxic team culture. The athlete I chose to interview was a friend of mine, Elle. We're just going to call her Elle throughout the duration of this presentation. Elle is a 19-year-old Caucasian female from Ridgway, Colorado, but grew up in Montrose until her freshman year of high school. She described her socioeconomic background as upper middle class. Her introduction to sports was doing gymnastics beginning at 3 years old through 8th grade. She did cheer her freshman year of high school, then dropped that to do soccer and cross country and track her sophomore year through senior year. She began taking running more seriously as her main sport when her high school coach told her that she was going to be the star runner on their team. After going to state, she realized that attending college for running was a real possibility, and she began emailing coaches at universities for a chance to sign. She got a response from Western and signed to the NCAA cross country and track team. She then switched to the non-NCAA trail running team during the spring semester of her sophomore year. She is not on scholarship for her sport because D2 normally doesn't give full ride scholarships to athletes. Elle is going to be a junior at Western Colorado University in the fall. She is a theater major with a double minor in creative writing and film. Her interests outside of running are acting, writing, camping, and hiking. She describes most of her interests as being active or taking place outdoors. After college, she plans on signing to a professional trail running brand, pursuing an acting career, or both. A big part of my interview with Elle was exploring the different team dynamics and culture from her time on Western's double NCAA track team versus her time now as a member of the non-NCAA trail running team. When asked about her schedule as a student athlete, she said, "With NCAA, you showed up and you had to be on your A game every day. But with trail running, you can kind of show up as you are, and you can put as much effort, as much as you want into it, since you're more so choosing to be there than to NCAA. That was better mentally. Like, I can put as much as I want into this, but I don't have to show up and run this time every single day." In terms of running while sick or injured, she said, "In NCAA, a coach would just expect you to run through everything. Even if I was sick or something, I was going to run the workout and I was going to try to hit the same paces as if I were healthy," which doesn't make sense, but that's kind of how it was. In an article posted to Michigan State University Sport Coaching Leadership blog titled "Underacknowledged Yet Common, Preventing Emotional Abuse in Sport," author Michael Mignano identifies a coach-centered philosophy as partly the reason for all of the pressure placed on athletes. He states, "The coach-centered philosophy in sport culture has become more pervasive. For coaches to be considered successful or advance their own careers, they must rely on the successes and performances of their athletes. This unhealthy paternalism exacerbates the power dynamic and increases opportunities for emotionally abusive situations." I found this point super interesting, especially because it related back to something Elle had said during our interview. When I asked if she thought the coach influences the team culture a lot, she said, "Yeah, definitely. Just her personality and the way she views running. She was a national champion in college, and I think she went to the Olympic trials, so it really was her whole life. So I think she expects that from everyone else, but not everyone else is going to be that good." Based on my interview and the article by Mignano, I get the sense that much of the pressure NCAA athletes face comes from the unrealistic expectations of their coaches. In comparison, Elle had nothing but great things to say about her non-NCAA trail running coach and how much more lenient he is with injuries or taking time off to rest. I think this ties in tremendously to the value American culture places on winning, a value we have explored at length in this class. A quote from chapter 3 of the textbook states, "It is a fact that coaches do all they can to socialize their athletes with the value orientation that winning is the most admired achievement in sport. They reinforce winners with praise, honor, and status, meanwhile giving them certain extra privileges or leeway. Numerous reinforcers are used to illustrate that the primary goal of sports competition is to succeed, to win. Coaches also do all they can to instill in their athletes the character traits that they believe will produce winning teams: loyalty, enthusiasm, initiative, self-control, confidence, poise, hard work, and ambition. With regards to this being an NCAA versus non-NCAA issue, I think the pressure is much higher when the stakes are higher in combination with a coach who is maybe trying to relive her glory days as a runner herself through the talent of her athletes. For trail running, the stakes are lower. Therefore, the athletes have the opportunity to engage in the sport simply for the love of the sport. Something that really surprised me was how Elle described her high school sport experiences and the gender discrimination that she faced. She gave me countless examples comparing the treatment of the girls' track team versus the boys' team by her coaches. She said, "There was a 4th of July float every year, and for 2 years it was only boys, and we were like, we're on the team too, and we never even got invited. We had to beg to be able to go to the Denver meets because it was going to be top 9 boys, and even though we don't have a lot of girls, why not top 2 or 3 girls? At one of our banquets, the boys' coach called each boy up individually, gave a whole speech about each of them. But ours brought all the girls up together and gave a little speech about all of us and then had us sit down. But the boys got individual speeches." She gave other examples, like the boys getting new uniforms for state while the girls got nothing. The boys' coach refusing to interact with the girls, and the boys themselves refusing to move out of the way when the girls were using a lane on the track, but screaming for them to move when it was the other way around. Gender discrimination in sport is an extremely well-documented phenomenon, but it was very interesting to hear it directly from someone who has experienced it. These examples of discrimination, while on a micro level, highlight the larger issue of the devaluation of women's athletics. An article from the Women's Sports Foundation published in 2022 states, "The number of girls playing sports may be at an all-time high, but as Title IX prepares to turn 50 years old in 2022, research by the Women's Sports Foundation reveals that girls today still have fewer high school participation opportunities than boys did when the landmark legislation was passed in 1972. This statistic actually blew my mind a little bit. The article goes on to give specific numbers, stating the report, titled 50 Years of Title IX We're Not Done Yet, found that nationwide there are currently 3.4 million participation opportunities for high school girls, falling short of the 3.6 million participation opportunities boys received in high school sports 50 years ago. These statistics further highlight just how big this disparity is between boys and girls sports, and I think this plays into Elle's experience of being treated as not as important as her male colleagues. I think the devaluation and trivialization of women's athletics, as we've discussed in this class, is a much larger social issue with roots in the patriarchy and traditional gender roles. I also think it's interesting that Elle's high school coaches were all male, even for the girls' track team. An article from Forbes titled, "Here's Why Women's Teams Are Coached by Men" explains why this is, and it actually goes back to the passage of Title IX. The article reads, "In 1972, just prior to Title IX, women held 90% of the head coaching positions for women's teams. Title IX forced colleges and universities, at least those that receive federal funds, to provide equal funding for men's and women's sports. Although this was a big boom for female college athletes, it had the exact opposite impact on female coaches. When Title IX was enacted, money flooded into women's sports, and universities were forced to offer significantly higher salaries to coaches for these teams. Suddenly, men were interested in these jobs, and they were hired. While Title IX helped to boost women's athletics to its current state, I think we have to take a step back and consider the consequences of this increased emphasis and money filtering into women's sports. I think it's fascinating that once there was more money involved, then men decided they wanted in on this budding industry, edging out female coaches and other women in upper management of these teams. Increased men's involvement in women's sports is a blaring example of the patriarchy at play. Men suddenly wanted the jobs coaching women's teams, and because the patriarchy values male authority and automatically views males as more competent, they got the jobs. I think Elle's treatment by her coaches and the discrimination she faced can largely be attributed to the patriarchy. Just because a man is coaching a woman's team does not mean that he doesn't share in the sexist views of society as a whole. Just because a man is coaching a woman's team does not mean that he does not see them as inferior to men. To me, this explains why the girls were not taken to meets that the boys were taken to, and why they didn't get new uniforms, and why the girls were not featured on the 4th of July float. If it really was about athletics, their coach would have advocated harder for them to get these opportunities. It's just unimaginable to me that a coach would purposefully impede the success of the athletes they coach, which leads me to the conclusion that it really is about gender and misogyny, whether intentional or unintentional. Another conclusion I came to while interviewing Elle is that for college athletes, sports come before school. Elle expressed this manifesting in multiple ways, one being pressure from her coach. She said, "Coach got mad at me because I did the show Love. She got really mad at me. I mean, I still did it, but she was really mad because I couldn't go to the conference race. After that, I feel like she just thought I didn't have the commitment within the sport. And I was like, no, I do. But theater is also my major. It's hard to balance. Coaches will say your education comes first, but you know that they just have to say that. For example, that thing with Coach telling M, a mutual friend, she couldn't take that class because we have practice, but she needs that class to graduate. And it's only offered this semester, so she's gonna have to wait a whole year to take it, so obviously it's not your first priority. For Elle and her coach, when she still did NCAA, everything revolved around practice. And if a class interfered with practice, the answer was simple: don't take the class. This highlights the fact that NCAA coaches tend to be extremely demanding of their athletes, expecting their number one priority to be the sport. And for a lot of student athletes, their number one priority is the sport, Elle included. When I asked if her role as a student athlete helps or hinders her academic performance, Elle said, "I'm very about school, which is not great, but I definitely focus on my sport a lot more than I do school, and I let school be on the back burner. If I were to list priorities, it would be running, then myself, /recovery, /self-care, and then it would be school." This list of priorities Elle provided that put running first and academics third doesn't surprise me. More and more scandals have come out exposing the academic cheating that tends to be a result of this sport-first mentality that is perpetuated, or at the very least, turned a blind eye to by coaches. The textbook describes one such case. For decades, college athletes have remained eligible by taking classes that can be described only as bogus, but the academic scandal in the athletics department of the University of North Carolina, with its reputation as one of the nation's finest public institutions of higher education, was unexpected. It began with a report by an academic tutor that football and basketball players were being steered into fake classes in the school's African American Studies department to ensure that they remained eligible. After investigating the report, university officials acknowledged that more than 200 phony courses were offered. Tutors wrote papers for students, and hundreds of grades were changed without authorization. This scandal highlights the lengths college coaches and students alike will go to in order to prioritize the sport and ensure that only the bare minimum is being achieved on the academic side of it. just enough to keep the athlete eligible, but not too much or it'll distract their time and energy away from the sport, and definitely not enough to ensure that they are receiving a quality education. Cases of academic fraud highlight the winning at all costs mentality that is pervasive in society and leads to cheating of all kinds in sports. Illegal recruiting, sports doping, and other under-the-table practices are a result of a highly competitive society that puts sports performance above all else, including academics. Lastly, something that stuck out to me when interviewing Elle was her description of the toxic team culture she experienced amongst the other girls on her NCAA track team. When I asked about the environment on her team, she said, "That NCAA team was the most toxic team I have ever been on. And I've been on a lot of girl-centered teams, and that was the most toxic team I've ever been on. People were so judgmental. Me and Em would be laughing, and they would give us horrible looks, talk bad about us behind our backs. Everyone would talk bad about everyone behind their backs. For people on the team, running was their life, but they weren't even happy to be running. All they did was run. Their only friends were on the team. Me and Em had a bunch of friends off the team. I was in theater, I worked for Lead, and I do all this other stuff. They're not my best friends, but for the most of the people on that team, their only friends are on the team. So then competitiveness is with your best friends." This revelation was super interesting to me, and so I pushed further to know where this nastiness between teammates, who in theory were supposed to be uplifting each other, comes from. I was surprised to learn that it was partly coming from the coach as some kind of tactic to elicit better performances from the athletes. Elle said, anytime we would have meetings, we would have exit meetings with her, and she would kind of place you. She would tell me where she wanted me to be and who she wanted me to be with. "You're gonna run with so-and-so." And she would tell me that at these exit meetings, and so it was expected that I was with them. And I think that also plays into the culture of rank and placement on the team. For conference and national meets, Western has qualified consistently, so it's expected that the team is gonna go. So it's not like we're fighting as a team to make it, it's just fighting within the team for who's gonna go. That's also not a great thing because we're probably gonna make it to nationals, but it's like, who is gonna make it on that team? Who is gonna outbeat the other people at this conference so you can be on that team? I think for individual sports like track and field, this competitive atmosphere between teammates makes sense because in theory, your teammates are also your competition. An article posted to Viking Sports Magazine titled "The Final Word, Competition Conundrum" further explains this concept, saying, known as intra-team competition, competing with teammates can walk a fine line between lifting people up and bringing them down. Uplifting when it drives each athlete to be better, degrading when it becomes extreme and degrades. In individual sports where solo performance is the norm, it can make people want their teammates to do poorly because of the fiercely competitive desire to beat them. Similarly, in team sports, when two players are competing for one spot on the starting line or for playing time. I think the toxic team culture that Elle experienced is a result of an individualist mentality that Americans are especially prone to. The textbook highlights this in chapter 3, stating, competition pervades all of the social institutions of the United States. The prominence of competition in schools is seen as the selection process for athletic teams, cheerleading squads, debate teams, choruses, bands, and playcasts. In each case, competition among classmates is the criteria for selection. Even the grading system is often based on the comparisons of classmates with one another. Learning about this toxic culture of competition that Elle experienced on her team didn't shock me, but only further proved to me that the US has a serious obsession with individual achievement, success, and the idea that you're only winning if you're beating someone else. I do think, however, that things don't have to be this way. I think bigger emphasis on a team first mentality could be adopted by coaches to keep the environment on their team more supportive and healthy. Cross country and track aren't entirely individual sports. The better each individual runner does, the better the sum of scores, which determines the winning team. In conclusion, my interview with Elle was extremely insightful into the world of sports, and I had many takeaways. I think NCAA sports and coaches can be pretty extreme and demanding on athletes, insinuating that sickness and mental health isn't real, or insinuating that academics are less important than sports. I also think gender discrimination is still a huge issue in sports, and only a reflection of the patriarchal society we live under. The pressure of athletic performance leads to taking extreme measures in order to win, like academic fraud. Lastly, the emphasis on competition and individualism in American society can lead to toxic team environments that are harmful to athletes. Sports really are just a microcosm of society, and this exploration and interview that I was able to do really opened my eyes to various social issues that exist not only in sports, but in every facet of society. And here are my sources. Thank you very much.